Imagine walking into a courtroom, ready to give your verdict on a serious crime, and then suddenly realizing the person on trial is your own childhood best friend. What would you do? Would you follow the law or follow your heart? Today's story will leave you shocked, emotional, and questioning what justice truly means, because what happened inside that courtroom is something no one expected. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled to the brim with anxious faces. Reporters sat in the front rows, scribbling furiously in their notepads, while others tapped away on their laptops, desperate to capture every detail for tomorrow's headlines. Outside the tall wooden doors, the muffled sound of cameras clicking echoed like a steady drumbeat, each flash capturing the tension of the day. The entire city seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for one man's decision, the judge's verdict. The case had attracted more attention than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just about money or crime or business. It was about betrayal, power, and the shocking fall of a man who once had a spotless reputation. Whispers filled the air as spectators leaned toward one another, speculating about what would happen. Some were convinced the defendant was guilty, a man who had stolen everything for greed. Others believed he was an innocent victim, framed by those who envied his success. But what no one knew, not the jury, not the lawyers, not even the buzzing crowd of journalists, was that this trial would take an unimaginable turn, a turn that would leave everyone speechless, a twist that could never have been predicted. For hidden beneath the stiff suits, the legal arguments, and the mountain of paperwork lay a truth no one saw coming. At the front of the room, the judge's chair sat high above the rest, polished and imposing. Soon, Judge William Carter would take his seat there, his gavel in hand, ready to bring order to the chaos. People knew him as a man of discipline, someone who had spent years building a reputation for fairness and strict adherence to the law. His word carried weight. When he spoke, silence followed. His verdicts had shaped lives, toppled careers, and set new standards for justice. Today, however, Judge Carter was about to face the most personal and unexpected challenge of his career. As he walked toward the bench, adjusting his robe with steady hands, he had no idea that the face waiting for him at the defendant's table wasn't just another name in a file. It was a ghost from his past, a person he thought he'd never see again. And what happened next would shock everyone. Judge William Carter was no ordinary man. To the city, he was a symbol of integrity, a figure who represented justice in its purest form. His sharp mind, steady composure, and unshakable fairness had earned him the respect of lawyers, prosecutors, and even those he had sentenced over the years. People often said he was the kind of judge who never flinched, never showed favoritism, and never let emotions cloud his judgment. When Judge Carter spoke, people listened. On this day, as the heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open, all eyes turned toward him. His black robe flowed behind him like a shadow, his steps measured and firm as he made his way to the bench. The murmurs in the gallery instantly quieted, and the tension in the room grew thicker. Reporters stopped writing mid-sentence, and even the lawyers paused to watch as he ascended the steps to his high seat. Judge Carter adjusted his glasses, a familiar habit that gave him a moment to collect his thoughts. With calm precision, he placed the thick case file on the bench before him. The leather folder was worn at the edges, a silent reminder of the countless cases he had presided over. Yet this one felt different. Even before he looked at the defendant, there was a strange heaviness in the air, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He flipped open the file and glanced at the name. Then, almost reluctantly, his eyes shifted to the accused, a man standing nervously in front of the court. The defendant's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie, trying to appear calm, though the fear in his eyes betrayed him. He looked like someone carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, someone who knew that this trial would decide the rest of his life. For Judge Carter, it was routine, at least at first. Countless defendants had stood in that very spot, staring up at him, some pleading for mercy, others defiantly proclaiming innocence. But as his gaze lingered on the man before him, something stirred deep within his memory. The shape of the jawline, the way the man's eyes darted nervously, even the faint tremor in his voice as he addressed the court, all of it felt hauntingly familiar. Judge Carter leaned back ever so slightly, his heart skipping a beat. He didn't know it yet, but the man standing trial was about to change everything. He thought he knew about justice, about fate and about his own past. At first, Judge Carter thought his eyes were deceiving him. He blinked, adjusted his glasses, and leaned forward just slightly, narrowing his gaze at the man sitting in the defendant's chair. Something about that face tugged at his memory. The curve of the cheekbones, the nervous way he shifted in his seat, even the faint scar near his eyebrow. All of it stirred something deep. Within William, something long buried. The judge's heart began to race, though his expression remained carefully neutral. To everyone else, he appeared calm and collected, just as he always was. But inside, he was reeling. Could it be? Could the man sitting before him, accused of serious crimes, truly be someone from his past? And then, in one breathless instant, the truth struck him. A flood of memories rushed back like a storm breaking through a dam. That face, that nervous pair of eyes. It wasn't just any defendant. It was Daniel Miller. Not Daniel Miller, the accused criminal. Not Daniel Miller, the man in a courtroom file. No, to Judge Carter. This was Danny. His Danny. The boy he had grown up with. The kid who had lived just 2 houses down on Maple Street. His childhood best friend. Suddenly, the courtroom seemed to fade away. The voices, the whispers, the clicking of pens. All of it dissolved as William was pulled into the past. He remembered summer afternoons where he and Danny raced their bikes down the dirt road, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood. He remembered nights spent under the stars, the 2 boys lying in the grass, sharing dreams about what they wanted to become when they grew up. Danny had wanted adventure, maybe to travel the world. William, even back then, had talked about law and justice. They had been inseparable, 2 boys bound by loyalty and trust. But as the years went on, life had pulled them apart. William went off to college, while Danny drifted in another direction, taking paths William knew nothing about. Eventually, the friendship faded, as childhood bonds often do. And now, after decades of silence, here he was, not in a park, not on a street corner, not at a reunion, but in a courtroom, wearing the title of defendant. Judge Carter felt a lump form in his throat. This was no longer just another case. This was personal, very personal. In an instant, Judge Carter remembered everything. The years seemed to melt away as he stared at the man before him. It was as if the courtroom had vanished, replaced by the dusty streets and warm evenings of his childhood. He and Daniel had grown up together in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other by name. Back then, life was simple. The biggest worries they had were scraped knees, broken baseball bats, or who got to bat first at the local park. William could almost smell the fresh-cut grass of the little field, where they played baseball every afternoon. Daniel was always the daring one, the boy who would slide headfirst into base just to win the game, even if it meant tearing his jeans. William, on the other hand, was more cautious, always thinking 2 steps ahead. Yet together, they made the perfect team. They weren't just friends. They were brothers in every way that mattered. They shared secrets no one else knew. When William's father lost his job, it was Daniel who snuck over late at night, whispering encouragement and promising that things would get better. When Daniel's dog passed away, William sat by his side for hours, helping him through the grief. They dreamed of the future together. Daniel wanted adventure, to see the world beyond their small town, while William dreamed of law school, of one day wearing the robe of a judge. But as time passed, life took them in different directions. William studied hard, earned scholarships, and worked his way into a promising career in law. Daniel, however, began to drift. At first, it was little things, skipping school, hanging around with the wrong crowd, chasing quick thrills instead of steady goals. Eventually, the gap between them widened, and before William knew it, Daniel was gone from his life. No phone calls, no letters, no reunions, just silence. Now, decades later, here they were, their paths colliding in the most unexpected place imaginable. William had risen to the bench, respected and admired. Daniel had found himself on the opposite side of justice, standing trial for crimes that could ruin him forever. The irony was crushing. The boy who once slid across the dirt to win a baseball game was now sliding on the edge of losing his future. And the friend who once promised him loyalty for life now held his fate in his hands. The file in front of Judge Carter felt heavier than it should have. His hands, usually so steady, hesitated for a moment as he turned the first page. The bold black letters glared back at him like a scar on paper. Daniel Miller, charged with embezzlement. William's heart sank. The accusation was clear. Daniel had allegedly stolen thousands of dollars from the company, where he worked as a financial manager. The report detailed missing funds, suspicious transfers, and a trail of falsified documents that seemed to point directly to him. To anyone else, the case looked airtight. A textbook example of corporate greed and betrayal. The prosecutor's summary was concise but devastating. According to the evidence, Daniel had siphoned money over months, quietly moving funds into accounts he controlled. Emails hinted at secret deals. Bank records showed unexplained deposits. To the jury, it looked like more than enough proof. The atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with certainty. This man was guilty. But Judge Carter's heart refused to accept what his eyes were reading. He remembered Daniel as the boy who once gave away his lunch to a classmate who had none, the teenager who worked odd jobs just to help his mother pay the bills. That Daniel was kind, loyal, and honest. Could life have really changed him so much? Could the friend who once shared his dreams now be capable of stealing without remorse? The jury members exchanged glances, already whispering about the strength of the evidence. Some of them scribbled notes eagerly, as if the case was practically solved before it even began. To them, Daniel was just another criminal who had traded integrity for greed. But to William, he was more than that. He was a piece of his past, a reminder of childhood innocence, now standing on the edge of ruin. The more William read, the more conflicted he became. His duty as a judge demanded impartiality, to let the evidence speak louder than sentiment. But in the pit of his stomach, something resisted. His instincts screamed that this didn't add up. The file said embezzler. His heart whispered friend, and the battle between the two had only just begun. For the first time in decades, their eyes met across the silent courtroom. It was a moment that seemed to stretch on forever, though in reality it lasted only a few seconds. Daniel's eyes widened in shock, recognition flashing instantly, like a spark rekindling a fire long thought extinguished. His lips trembled before curling into a faint, almost guilty smile, not one of joy, but of bittersweet acknowledgement. It was the smile of a man who suddenly remembered a different life, a different time, and perhaps wished he could step back into it. Judge Carter froze, his heart hammering in his chest. For a split second, he wasn't a judge seated on the high bench of justice. He was William, a boy seeing his best friend again after years of silence. The years, the distance, the differences between them melted away in that single glance. It was as though the courtroom around them had disappeared, leaving only two old friends staring at one, another across an unspoken canyon of regret. But that moment was dangerous. William knew it. He forced himself to swallow the lump rising in his throat and pulled the mask of professionalism back over his face. His jaw tightened, his brow hardened, and his features returned to the cold, unreadable expression that defined his reputation. To anyone watching, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Just a judge doing his job, looking at the defendant. No one could know what storm was raging inside him. Daniel, however, had seen enough. His eyes lingered, as if pleading for understanding, for mercy, for some sign that their shared past still meant something. The guilty smile faded, replaced by a look of desperation, the look of a man standing at the edge of a cliff, hoping the only person he trusted might still catch him before the fall. William quickly broke eye contact, lowering his gaze back to the file in front of him. His hands gripped the wooden bench, steadying himself. He reminded himself of his oath, of his duty. A judge cannot afford sentiment. Yet beneath the stern exterior, his thoughts betrayed him. What happened to you, Daniel? How did we end up here? That silent exchange spoke louder than words ever could. Two lives, once intertwined, now stood on opposite sides of justice. The prosecutor rose from his seat with confidence, adjusting his tie as he approached the jury. His voice rang through the courtroom with authority, each word carefully measured to strike like a hammer. Piece by piece, he laid out the evidence against Daniel, weaving a story that painted him as nothing more than a calculating thief. He began with the forged documents, contracts and invoices, doctored with Daniel's signature, suggesting a deliberate attempt to funnel company funds into hidden accounts. The papers were projected onto a screen for everyone to see, each falsified number highlighted in bright red. Gasps rippled through the gallery as jurors leaned forward, some already scribbling notes with stern expressions. Next came the missing money. The prosecutor explained how thousands of dollars had quietly vanished from the company's accounts over several months. He outlined how the timing of those disappearances lined up perfectly with Daniel's control of the finances. The implication was clear. No one else had the access. No one else had the opportunity. Then came the most damning evidence of all, the suspicious bank transfers. Screens displayed records of funds, moving from the company's account into personal accounts under Daniel's name. The prosecutor's voice sharpened with each detail. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he declared, "this is not an accident. This is not coincidence. This is theft, plain and simple." The jury nodded in near unison. To them, it was already making sense. The puzzle pieces seemed to fit neatly together. Reporters scribbled furiously, already imagining tomorrow's headlines: respected employee, exposed as embezzler. The room felt heavy with certainty, as though the verdict was already written. But then Daniel's lawyer stood. His voice was softer at first, almost drowned out by the weight of the prosecution's case. But it carried an undercurrent of conviction. He argued that the evidence wasn't what it seemed. The forged documents? Planted. The missing money? Conveniently timed. The transfers? A setup. He painted a picture of a man betrayed, not by greed, but by envy, a jealous coworker who had everything to gain from Daniel's downfall. He appealed to the jury's sense of reason. "You've seen documents and numbers," he said firmly, "but have you seen proof of intent? Or have you seen a desperate attempt to frame an innocent man?" For the first time, doubt flickered across the jurors' faces. Judge Carter sat in his high-backed chair, his expression as unreadable as stone. To the jury, to the lawyers, and to the crowded gallery, he was the picture of composure, calm, disciplined, impartial. But beneath the surface, his heart churned with a storm of emotions he could no longer contain. Could it really be true? Could Daniel, the boy who once sprinted across dusty fields with him, laughing with reckless abandon, truly be guilty of such betrayal? William's mind fought against the possibility. He remembered Daniel's kindness, his loyalty, the way he used to share everything, even the last piece of candy from his pocket. That boy had never been capable of cruelty, let alone greed. But then the cold, unyielding weight of the evidence pressed down on him. The documents, the transfers, the missing money. Each detail seemed to shout the same damning truth. On paper, Daniel wasn't a childhood friend. He was a criminal. William felt his throat tighten. This wasn't just another case. This was a clash between two worlds, the innocence of his past and the harsh reality of the present. He longed to believe Daniel, to see even a shred of the boy he had once known reflected in his eyes. But when he looked at the man sitting before him, he saw someone broken, desperate, and stained by suspicion. For a moment, William allowed himself to imagine the jury's perspective. They didn't see a childhood friend. They didn't hear the laughter of two boys under the summer sun. They saw only a defendant, cornered by damning evidence. And wasn't that what justice demanded? Decisions made not by feelings, but by facts? Still deep within him, a quiet voice whispered, "People change." But do they change this much? He wanted desperately to believe there was an explanation, a mistake, something that would unravel this nightmare. Yet the longer the trial went on, the harder it became to separate truth from illusion. To everyone else, Judge Carter was just doing his job, maintaining order and neutrality. But inside, he was reliving every game, every dream, every memory, and asking himself the most painful question of his life. Had his best friend truly become a thief? Or was he watching an innocent man be destroyed? During the recess, the heavy atmosphere of the courtroom seemed to loosen slightly as people stretched their legs and whispered about the trial. Lawyers shuffled papers, reporters hurried to file updates, and jurors stepped out to grab coffee, their faces still etched with concentration. But amid the noise and movement, one silent exchange changed everything. Daniel sat slumped at the defense table, his shoulders hunched, his eyes tired from hours of being painted as a criminal. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he lifted his gaze to the bench where Judge Carter still sat. Their eyes met once again, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. Then, with lips trembling but eyes steady, Daniel mouthed two words that carried the weight of decades. "Help me!" William's chest tightened instantly, as if the words had pierced through the robe, through the years, and straight into his heart. The courtroom around him blurred. He didn't hear the shuffle of footsteps or the low murmur of voices. All he could see was his old friend's desperate plea, etched into those two silent syllables. But what did it mean? Was this the cry of a guilty man cornered by the truth, begging for leniency from someone who once knew him as a boy? Or was it the last desperate call of an innocent soul, framed and forgotten, reaching out to the only person he believed might still care? William's mind raced. His role as judge demanded impartiality. He could not act as a savior, nor could he afford to show favoritism. Every eye in the courtroom trusted him to be a pillar of fairness. Yet beneath that heavy responsibility, the voice of a friend whispered in his heart, "What if he's telling the truth? What if this is his only chance?" He remembered the Daniel of his youth, the boy who once grabbed his hand and pulled him to safety when a neighborhood dare went too far. That Daniel had never abandoned him. Now here he was, silently asking William not to abandon him in return. William forced himself to look away, but his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the bench. Two words had shaken him more than an entire mountain of evidence. "Help me." And in that moment, Judge Carter realized that this trial was no longer just about justice. It was about trust, loyalty, and the unbearable weight of choice. The trial had reached a tense standstill. The prosecution was confident. The jury was leaning toward conviction, and Daniel sat with the weary look of a man preparing for the worst. But then, just as the defense prepared to rest their case, the courtroom doors creaked open. Every head turned as a man in a neatly pressed suit stepped inside. His presence sent a ripple of curiosity through the crowd. The defense attorney rose to his feet, a small but knowing smile playing on his lips. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady, "the defense would like to call a surprise witness." Judge Carter's brows arched ever so slightly. Surprise witnesses were rare and often controversial, but he nodded. "Proceed." The man walked to the stand, his footsteps echoing in the silent chamber. He was introduced as Michael Turner, Daniel's former co-worker. His hands shook slightly as he swore the oath, eyes darting nervously toward Daniel. Then, with a trembling breath, he began to speak. "I can't stay silent anymore," Michael confessed, his voice cracking. "It wasn't Daniel, it was me. I planted the evidence." Gasps erupted from the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously. Jurors' mouths dropped open, and Daniel himself stared in shock, struggling to comprehend what he had just heard. Even Judge Carter, trained to maintain composure, felt a jolt run through him. Michael continued, guilt pouring out of him like water from a broken dam. He admitted to forging the documents, creating the false bank transfers, and setting Daniel up to take the fall. His motive? Pure jealousy. Daniel had been promoted over him, respected by colleagues and admired by superiors. Michael couldn't stand it. In his bitterness, he hatched a plan to destroy Daniel's career. "I never thought it would go this far," he said, his voice shaking as tears welled in his eyes. "I just wanted him gone. I didn't think he'd end up in prison." The courtroom exploded in whispers and murmurs. The jury members exchanged wide-eyed glances, their certainty now shattered. The prosecutor's face turned pale, his carefully built case crumbling before his eyes. And in that instant, everything shifted. Daniel was no longer the villain, he was the victim. With the truth finally revealed, it was as if a storm had passed through the courtroom and left silence in its wake. Judge Carter sat tall, his hands resting firmly on the bench, though inside he felt lighter than he had in hours. The confession from Daniel's co-worker had changed everything. The crushing weight that had pressed against his chest since the trial began slowly lifted, replaced by something he had not allowed himself to feel: hope. He glanced down at the man who had once been his best friend. Daniel's face was pale, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, his entire body trembling as though he were standing on the edge of freedom, but afraid to believe in it. For the first time since the trial began, William allowed himself a small pause, a moment to breathe before speaking. He knew that in this instant, every ear in the room waited for his words. Every heart pounded in unison with Daniel's. He steadied his voice, forcing it to carry the weight of both justice and compassion. "Based on the evidence," he began, his tone clear and unwavering, "the court finds the defendant, Daniel Miller, He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the gravity of the moment sink in. Not guilty." The words seemed to echo, bouncing off the courtroom walls like a thunderclap. For a moment there was stunned silence, and then the room erupted. Gasps, cries, and shouts filled the air as the gallery exploded with disbelief and relief. Reporters rushed to scribble notes, their pens barely keeping up with the chaos of the moment. Daniel's hands flew to his face as tears streamed freely down his cheeks. His body shook with relief, the years of fear and the weight of false accusations finally crashing off his shoulders. His lawyer clapped him gently on the back, smiling through tears of his own. Judge Carter, though outwardly calm, felt his throat tighten. It wasn't just the vindication of truth that moved him. It was the salvation of a friend he thought he'd lost forever. For the first time in decades, justice and friendship had walked hand in hand. And as the gavel struck, the sound was not just a symbol of order. It was the sound of redemption. After the gavel struck and the courtroom emptied, a hush lingered in the air. Reporters hurried outside to file their stories. Jurors quietly discussed the shocking twist, and the attorneys packed away their files. But for William and Daniel, the world had shrunk to a single moment, heavy with decades of silence and the miracle of fate. Judge Carter stepped down from the bench with measured steps, his robe trailing behind him like the remnants of authority. He was momentarily setting aside. For the first time that day, he wasn't Judge Carter. He was simply William, the boy from Maple Street. He stopped just a few feet away from Daniel. The two men stood frozen, eyes locked, each searching the other's face for traces of the boys they used to be. Daniel's eyes brimmed with tears that refused to fall. His lips trembled as he struggled to find words big enough for the moment. Finally, his voice cracked in a whisper, raw and honest. "I thought I'd lost everyone. Thank you for believing in me." William felt his chest tighten. Those words carried more weight than any verdict he had ever given. He swallowed hard, emotion threatening to break through the stoic mask he had worn for so many years. Slowly, he extended his hand. Daniel looked at it for a heartbeat, then clasped it firmly. Their handshake was more than a gesture. It was a bridge, rebuilding something time and circumstance had nearly destroyed. Memories flooded between them, dirt-stained baseball gloves, summer nights filled with laughter, promises whispered under starlit skies. For a moment, they weren't judge and defendant, not even two grown men. They were just William and Danny again, the kids who once believed their friendship could withstand anything. Daniel's tears finally spilled, but his smile shone through. William allowed himself the faintest smile in return, a warmth he hadn't felt in years spreading through him. Their bond, thought to be long buried, had been renewed in the unlikeliest of places, a courtroom, a place usually associated with endings. But for them, it was the beginning of something new. The story spread like wildfire. Within hours, newspapers ran bold headlines. Judge saves childhood friend from false charges. Talk shows debated the dramatic twist, and social media buzzed with clips from the trial. To the world, it was a sensational story, a gripping drama that felt like it belonged in a movie rather than real life. But for Judge William Carter, it wasn't about headlines or attention. As he sat quietly in his chambers after the courtroom had emptied, William reflected on what had just happened. He thought about the boy he used to ride bikes with, the one who had vanished into adulthood and reappeared. Decades later, not at a reunion, not by chance but in a courtroom, accused of a crime that nearly destroyed his life. The irony wasn't lost on him. Fate had chosen the strangest of settings for their paths to cross again. But more than nostalgia, William felt the weight of what he had learned. Justice, he realized, was never just about laws written on paper. Laws were rigid, black and white. Humanity, however, lived in the gray spaces in between. That was where compassion, fairness, and understanding resided. Without those, justice was incomplete. He knew that if he had let his emotions cloud his judgment, things could have gone wrong. But equally, if he had ignored the humanity of the man before him, the man he once knew as a friend, the truth might never have come to light. Balance, he now understood, was the key. As for Daniel, the trial had given him back not only his freedom, but also something far more precious, a second chance at life, and a rekindled friendship he thought was lost forever. Sometimes the past does find us, William thought, and when it does, it changes everything. It reminds us of who we were, who we've become, and who we still have the chance to be. In the end, this wasn't just the story of a judge saving a childhood friend. It was a reminder to everyone watching that justice must carry both wisdom and heart, because at the core of every case are human lives, fragile and real. And that's how a courtroom turned into the stage for one of the most powerful reunions you'll ever hear. Stories like this remind us that justice isn't just about laws, it's about humanity, second chances, and the bonds that time can't break. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring and emotional stories. Until next time, remember, the truth always finds its way out.